This is the final part of the I Own an Abandoned Motel series. I recommend checking out the full playlist in the description below. When my screams subsided, malevolent laughter filled the uneasy silence, discordant, cruel laughter that sounded as though it bubbled from underwater. I turned around to see the macabre faces of the Kane sisters behind me, pressed against the window of their cottage, black teeth chattering. Where did they take him? I demanded. My anger increased their delight. Where did they take him? Marjorie mocked, my own voice coming out of her blackened mouth.
Poor girl lost her puppy,
Margaretta cackled. I felt the rage rise within me, but I was utterly helpless. I knew they had the information we needed, but even if they were willing to speak, they could not be trusted. Suddenly, their faces changed. Their dead, white eyes widened in terror. Their smiles had melted. Mina shrieked, a cacophonous cry that sent my hands to my ears. It was Renee. Their eyes were fixed on him. His very presence caused them to tremble in fear.
What is he doing here?
Marjorie hissed.
Come back to hurt us again, he has,
Mina shrieked.
Devil take you, vampire,
Margaretta cried. I looked at Renee in astonishment. He wore an expression I had not seen before, a smile that was almost cruel. Well, if it isn't the old charlatan sisters, he said. I would have never guessed that she would still be keeping you around. But then again, she's always loved the most pathetic of sycophants.
Be gone, vampire, be gone,
they shouted. I would love nothing more. But you heard Nora. You have information we need. Where did they take the werewolf? Marjorie turned to me.
Stay away from him, girl, stay away. He hurt us,
Mina moaned. How about we make a deal? I said, thinking quickly. The sisters cocked their terrible heads in curiosity. You can tell me your story, tell me what he did, but in return, you must tell us where they took our friend. Renee raised his eyebrows, but did not protest. And I will know when you are lying, he added menacingly. The sisters looked at each other and began to nod eagerly.
The girl says she will listen,
they whispered excitedly, and I felt a pang of pity. Do you agree?
Yes,
they hissed, the glee returning to their voices. The door to the cottage opened. I stepped inside with Renee close behind me.
No appreciation for the fine art of channeling,
muttered Margaretta. The sisters gestured to the chairs at the table. Renee and I sat, but I kept my arms tightly crossed. The sisters closed their eyes and moved from side to side rhythmically, putting themselves into a trance. They moaned and their mouths opened, emitting a thick, ectoplasmic mist. Gross, I whispered to Renee, who smirked in response. The mist enveloped us, and our ramshackle surroundings, along with the sisters, vanished. In their place appeared a mid-19th century parlor, a finely carved mantel draped in black crepe. The ornamental mirror on top covered with black cloth. It was night. The heavy damask curtains were drawn. Elegant oil lamps were lit on a large oak table, also draped in black. The sisters sat at the table, very much alive, dressed in ostentatious displays of mourning, their wide skirts spread across the chairs they sat in, jet bracelets clattering at their wrists. Human hands wreathed by delicate lace grabbed those of an older man who trembled with emotion. A small audience observed the seance, dressed for an evening's entertainment. There was one man in particular whose clothing was undoubtedly the finest, with a dazzling silver jacquard waistcoat. Though he wore a pair of blue-tinted spectacles, I immediately recognized him as Rene. His brown hair was longer, combed away from his face and curling just under his ears. He was smiling. That same strange smile I had seen before. The sisters made their usual dramatic entreaties to the great beyond, and the crowd gasped when the spirits responded intelligently to their questions with a series of rapping sounds. The man begged them to contact the spirit of his young daughter, who had perished in a carriage accident decades before. The sisters obliged, making contact through the rapping. With a flourish, Mina threw her head back, and out of her mouth squeaked the voice of a small child. The man collapsed in tears. Women in the audience dabbed their eyes with their handkerchiefs. Rene was no longer smiling. When the audience had shuffled out, Rene lingered. Margareta gave him an unctuous grin.
How may we assist you, sir?
I would like to schedule a private appointment. He lowered his glasses and fixed his gray eyes on her. Margareta's eyes widened. She stared vacantly, as though in a daze.
We are entirely booked. We are in such demand, after all. We leave Rochester for our world tour this Saturday,
Marjorie said. Mina peered at Rene over her sister's arm and smiled. He winked at her. Such lovely ladies you are. Money should be of no issue, of course. I think you will find that you are free tomorrow evening, he said slowly. Margareta nodded.
Yes, we are.
Very good. I very much look forward to our session.
Yes,
shouted Mina, clearly enamored. Rene smiled and put on his top hat, taking his leave. The next night, the sisters eagerly awaited their guest. Rene arrived with a veiled woman on his arm, wearing lace gloves, matching the sisters, in a black silk gown. Mina looked slightly disappointed to see the woman, but the other sisters grinned at her obvious finery, expecting a hefty sum for their services. Ladies, I hope you don't mind. I have brought my wife, he said, almost unable to hide the sinister grin that crept across his face.
Of course, welcome, madam.
The veiled woman made no response. Rene escorted her to the table, and they joined hands. The room erupted in rapping.
The spirits are many in the ether tonight, Marjorie moaned. To whom do you wish to speak?
I wish to contact the spirit of our deceased child, Rene said, watching the sisters carefully.
Ah, yes. It is a child who appeared before me now. A beautiful child, Margareta cried. Child, rap twice for yes, or once for no. Are these your beloved parents before you?
Two distinct raps were heard on the table. Mina made an exaggerated gasp.
The child wishes to speak through my sister, Marjorie shouted.
Mina began to speak in the same squeaking voice as the previous evening. Rene could no longer contain his fury. With one swift movement, Rene rose and flipped over the table before them. He grabbed Mina by the neck. I have no child, you insidious swindlers, he shouted. He dug his fangs into Mina's neck, and the sisters began to scream. The witch stood and removed her veil, green eyes glowing, black teeth grinning. She raised her hand, and the remaining two sisters rose into the air. Rene threw the corpse of Mina at their feet. They sobbed hideously, begging the witch for mercy.
I have no use for such talentless fools, she said. We will do anything. We will be your most faithful servants, they cried, still suspended in the air.
Ask them how much money they've bled from the grieving, how they've bankrupted their victims in the name of their lost loved ones, Renee said, enraged, fangs bared. Let me finish with them. The witch sighed.
Forgive my friend with his tedious sense of justice. Would you really do anything? Bind yourselves to me for all time?
Yes, yes, Marjorie and Margareta cried. Idiots, Renee muttered. The witch curled her hand into a fist, and the women began to cough, hands clawing at their necks. Their eyes rolled into the back of their heads. The body of Mina rose to join them, with a sickening snap. The necks of Marjorie and Margareta broke, and they joined their sister in death. The corpses' mouths opened so wide the jaws were broken, and 3 familiar specters climbed out. The ghosts fell at the feet of the witch, making obsequies, hailing her, their mistress. The mist that had descended around the cottage dispersed, leaving the sisters glaring at us. Time to fulfill your end of the bargain, Renee demanded. We don't have much time. They chittered angrily and turned their ghoulish heads to me.
Girl, you have nothing to say of the crimes of your beau?
What I had seen had certainly shocked me, but it was something I could not bear to process at the moment.
He's right. Show us where they took Jake.
No lies, Renee warned. The sisters grumbled among themselves, but once again broke into a trance. A vision appeared before us. It was the river, a great gray mist hanging over it. A large, shadowy structure pushed its way through, revealing the towers of an elaborate stone castle. The castle was familiar to me. Around here, we call it Bellevue Castle, an abandoned, Gilded Age flight of fancy on a private island that is now our most famous tourist site. During the winter months, it is closed to guests, leaving the island abandoned. The vision dissolved into smoke. Renee stood up to leave.
You'll never reach him.
Before dawn, hissed Marjorie.
Yes, yes, the sun is rising, Revenant,
Margareta cackled. He ignored them. I followed him out, feeling their hateful stares at my back, leaving them to howl and complain amongst themselves. They had not been lying. I said, we arrived just as I began to feel the sun behind me. Renee had bolted for the dark bedroom. I found him sitting on the bed, his face in his hands, shoulders tense with frustration. I was frustrated too. We'd been outmaneuvered, and I feared for Jake's safety. Would she make him the object of her retaliation? I was certain of it. But there was no way I could sail for the castle without Renee. I may have a death warrant, but I do not have a death wish. We leave as soon as the sun sets tonight, he said, as though convincing himself. I don't think we have a choice, I said. Not if we want to find Jake. Do you think we'll be too late? I didn't want to contemplate it. I do not think she would kill him without us there to witness it. She wouldn't deprive herself of the spectacle. We have to understand that she is anticipating exactly what we are planning on doing. This is it then, I said, trying to sound strong, though I felt like a fist were gripping my heart. Renee lifted his head and took my hands. I won't let it happen, he said, I swear to you.
I don't think that's something you can promise, Renee. I pulled my hands back from his. It was hard to look at him when Mina's face flashed before me. Eyes filled with terror, just before he buried his fangs into her neck.
I realize that you have not seen me feed before,
he said quietly. Feed? You made it sound so casual. He raised my chin to his face, gray eyes resolute.
I have spent many decades in utter misery, disgusted by myself, by what I am. That self-loathing is still with me, and will be forever. But I cannot change the past, and I cannot restore what I have lost. If I can channel this bloodlust, this propensity for violence, against those who have done evil, then perhaps through evil, I can accomplish something good. Spare an innocent. This thought was the only thing that sustained me in that century of servitude by her side. And this is something I hope you never have to understand.
I'm trying.
I know.
I'm going to take a shower.
If you return while I am at rest, remember,
you'll look kinda dead.
I know.
He smiled sadly. I was desperate for the warmth of the shower. The cold within me was not merely the effect of winter, but a numbness I could not shake. I tried to reach back to a couple months ago, before the sky had changed to that ghastly green, before the abyss opened before me. It was as though I were viewing another person's life on a different planet. And yet the life I am living now does not seem like my own either. I'm straddling the lives of two strangers. I tried to imagine death. I tried to imagine not existing. Of course, I could not. Who can? I had to hope that there would be peace, that the spirits were not lying to comfort me. After all, I had already witnessed the existence of far more unlikely things. The sound of the water soothed me. I stepped inside, relishing those first few drops, immersing my body, emptying my mind. The future didn't matter. At that moment, I was alive, and that was glorious. I don't know how long I had been standing there when the water began to feel different, thicker, metallic tasting. I opened my eyes to find myself covered in blood. It was pouring out of the shower head. My skin began to burn, my hair falling out in clumps, my teeth loosening, and I spat them out. I screamed. I found myself on the floor of the shower, bruised, but wet from water alone. My hands fluttered to my mouth, my hair. Nothing was amiss. I dragged myself upright, trying not to sob. She would take even those small moments away from me. I toweled off with trembling hands and allowed myself a brief glance in the mirror, too fearful of what might stare back if I lingered. Beyond some considerably dark rings under my eyes, I looked relatively normal. Before, I had contemplated watching the full sunrise, sitting in the sunshine until eventually dozing on the couch. Instead, I went back to the dark bedroom and climbed under the covers of my bed. In my current state, my only comfort came in the form of the reanimated corpse next to me. I curled up beside him and fell asleep. Renee woke me up at sunset. Despite everything, I actually felt well rested and at ease.
Renee prepared by downing a large thermos of blood. I secured my uncle's knife under my coat in a leather belt sheath, my movements calm, almost mechanical. Renee handed me my silver bracelets, and a wave of sadness passed through me. "We don't know what state he is in," he whispered. I nodded and put them on my wrists. We set sail in silence, the boat's movements for once not triggering nausea. It was desperately cold on the water, despite the promise of spring in the near future. The cold struck through my gloves and burned my face. Renee was clearly not bothered by the climate. His coat wasn't even zipped. He stared ahead with his brows furrowed, scanning all around us for ice and other enemies. I thought of the summer and of the river crowded with life, with people laughing, speeding past each other on their boats, picnicking under the turrets of our destination, Bellevue Castle. "Do you know the story of Bellevue Castle, Renee?" I asked. "Manhattan hotelier wanted to build the grandest home in all of the islands, but his wife died before it could be completed. And in his grief, the husband asked all the workers to put down their tools and step away, leaving the castle a half-finished husk, a monument to lost love," I added. "I actually think he just ran out of money. I spent some time on that construction site in the 1890s. I laughed. "Of course you did. Don't burst the bubble of anyone on the tourist board, all right? That place is a big moneymaker around here." It was good to smile with him, even if just for a moment. As we neared the castle, a mist descended around us, just as in the vision of the sisters. The air felt heavy and old, as though rife with mildew and rot, difficult to inhale. The visibility severely decreased, but Renee was able to continue to navigate towards our destination, its hulking shadows barely detectable, even by his eyes. Our boat was hit by a wave, as though from the wake of a boat. Renee and I looked at each other, thinking the same thing. There was absolutely no one else on the river. A great creaking sound echoed all around us, the groaning of wood and metal. A veritable flotilla of ships and boats broke the surface all around us, arising from the depths glowing a ghostly green. There were wrecked wooden speedboats, steel-hulled freighters from the turn of the century, coal steamers, massive three-masted schooners, and frigates built for the wars of 200 years ago. No crew piloted these vessels, which groaned and sighed with the sadness of their years at the bottom. Something was weaving its way through the wrecks, howling through the air with the screeching of a cyclone. Renee leaned forward, craning his neck to spot it, when a rotting hand shot out of the water and grabbed his shoulder. He pulled it off, but another joined the attack, and another, until a great host of drowned, rotting corpses were pulling at him, threatening to board the boat. I grabbed a paddle and whacked at them, but there were too many. They were pulling him overboard, despite our best efforts. I clutched his arm, and with all my strength tried to drag him back in. The cacophony was approaching. My hair whipped around my face as the freezing winds accelerated. Something caught my boot, and my grip on Renee's hand slipped away. I was hurtled into the swirling air. I saw below me Renee's struggling body, dipping below the surface of the river, drowned dead glaring up at me lifelessly. The whirlwind hummed with the cries of miserable souls. I was suspended among them, falling upwards and upwards, until I could breathe no more. Thus began my final encounter
with a witch. I opened my eyes and blinked under the rays of the hot summer sun. My eyes adjusted, and I realized I was on a boat, a familiar Sea Ray Sundancer. My uncle was at the wheel, my father standing next to him. No, not this. I tried to open my mouth to scream, but I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. They were speaking calmly, but I could sense they were both anxious. "It's been getting worse, Denny," my uncle said. His voice was almost unrecognizable to me, far from that of a jovial uncle who was always good for a laugh. He looked as though he hadn't slept in days. "She gets a kick out of spooking you, that's all," my father said, trying to reassure his brother, but not quite convincing himself. No, this isn't just the occasional dead cat. I've been seeing her in my house, at work, nowhere near the motel. I think I'm losing it." "What about Martina? Has she noticed anything different?" "You know she doesn't know about her." "Yes, I know. But nothing different around the cottages?" Hearing my father speak of these things, a voice from my innocent past speaking of terrors that now haunted my life, it was jarring, to say the least. Nothing different. Denny, her laughter, it's everywhere. Every time I close my eyes, I hear it. She wants me. Oh God, I can't even say it. She wants to end your life? Uncle Jim looked at his brother in surprise. "I've heard her too," my dad whispered. My body shook in its invisible prison. "Dad, no." "We need to tell Nora," my uncle said. "No, Jim. You know it. You know she always finishes what she started. When we're gone, Nora's next. We have to warn her." "You're right," he said. "We should have told her years ago." The buzz of the boat's motor increased, and the boat began to speed forward, accelerating rapidly. Uncle Jim desperately grabbed at the throttle, trying to shift it, but it wouldn't budge. The steering wheel spun out of his hands as though it were being controlled by an invisible force. My father tried to wrest it back into his control, but it too could not be moved by the men in the boat. The boat continued to accelerate, bucking up and down on the water violently before finally swerving, hitting a shoal with great speed. I was utterly helpless as I watched my uncle's skull shatter in the windshield. My father was launched out of the craft. I heard his neck snap as it made contact with the hull. Their mangled bodies still seared into my mind. I found myself in a cold, damp room, sobbing on the packed dirt floor, my body once again my own. I sat up, a wave of dizziness passing through me. I was pretty sure I was underneath Bellevue Castle, in the unfinished wine cellar, familiar from the numerous tours I had taken there as a kid. The cellar was filled with barrels of old building supplies, still in the same spot they were when the lovelorn, or perhaps bankrupt, owner called a stop to construction over a century ago. In the opposite corner, however, there was something that wasn't there in the tourist season. Jake was huddled on the ground, unconscious, silver collar around his neck, his body laced with new, raw-looking scars,
as though he had been scorched or cut. I rushed over to him and began to shake his shoulder. He moaned. "Here, let me take this off," I said, fiddling with the silver collar. He winced. His eyes fluttered open. "Nora?" he said, dazed. "Don't try to talk. I've almost got it off." "No," he said weakly, grabbing my wrist. No, don't. Please." With a final twist, the collar clanged to the floor. But this only made Jake more agitated. "Nora, put it back on. Put it back on and get out of here. Please, I'm begging you. Get as far away from me as possible." "What are you talking about?" I cried. "I'm not going to torture you." He took the collar, but dropped it with a moan as his hand burned at the contact. "Run!" he shouted. He staggered backward, and I could see the telltale signs of transformation. But this time, his eyes began to glow, his mouth lengthening into the snarl of the wolf twisted, almost into a smile. The half-shifted creature before me laughed. "Too late now, girl," it growled. I bolted to the stairs, the grunts and howls of the final throes of transformation behind me. I climbed the stairs with speed I didn't know I possessed, slamming the door behind me. The wolf threw itself against it, buckling the wood with a sickening crack. I was in the castle's recreated kitchen. Frantically, I threw down the elegant copper molds that lined the walls, hoping to slow down the creature's pursuit. The cellar door gave way just as I fled the kitchen into a grand dining room. My eyes immediately fixed themselves on the elaborately set table, ready for an Edwardian feast, and my heart leapt with hope. Such a meal would never be served without the finest of silver. I scooped up the numerous utensils set before the nearest place setting, stuffing oyster forks, fish knives, butter knives, bouillon spoons, teaspoons, and anything else I could fit into my jacket pockets. The door behind me shattered, and the wolf came barreling towards me. I hopped up on the table and flung a giant silver soup tureen at him, hitting him on the chest with a howling hiss. "Sorry, Jake," I muttered as I ran into the front hallway. I pulled at the carved wood door leading outside, but it was locked, bolted with a padlock for the winter. Behind me was the grand staircase of gilded oak and marble. My only way forward was up. I knew the wolf would not be far behind me. Once he had shaken off his temporary debilitation. I ran up the stairs, up one flight, now two. The restored Gilded Age luxury of the first floors morphed into a dilapidated, unfinished area of exposed beams and plaster, covered with decades worth of graffiti. The wolf was in pursuit once more. I could hear the scratching of its claws on the marble of the stairs, making his way upwards. I turned around. The wolf crouched some feet below me, grinning, far closer than I had thought. I pulled out a few silver forks and threw them at him, sprinkling more on the stairs between us. The wolf howled with dismay. My eye caught a long ladder leading up to the turret. Without further thought, I raced toward it, pulling myself upwards while unsheathing the knife at my belt. The wolf had shaken off the silver and was at the bottom of the ladder. I tossed my last handful of spoons at him, hitting him in the snout, which bought me enough time to put more space between us. I could see the opening to the turret above me, but just as I managed to get my upper body through, a claw grasped at my boot. With all my strength I kicked at it, to no avail. I lowered my right arm and slashed at it with my knife. The claw released its grip, and I dragged the rest of my body through the opening. The wolf snarled at me, and he poised himself to jump. I pushed the ladder away, and he fell to the ground. Now in the turret room, I saw a large metal filing cabinet against the wall, and brought it down over the opening below with a tremendous bang that gave way to silence, revealing the ferocity of my haggard breathing. I took a step backward into something cold, the parts of my body that had come into contact with it tingling unpleasantly. I turned around. The witch stood before me, smiling that terrible smile, her eyes like coals. She was draped in thin, almost transparent black silk, her body a corpse-like gray. Her hair hung to her knees, wreathed in the brittle, dead leaves of late winter. I stumbled away from her, my back hitting the walls of the stone turret behind me, a large, arched window with the several stories fall my only escape. "Girl," she hissed, her voice a crackling flame. "I do not believe we have been properly introduced." "You need no introduction," I said bitterly. She laughed, the cadence about as pleasant as scraping paper with a broken pencil. "Many mortals call me a witch. Is that what you think I am? I think that's a mere euphemism for what you are." "Smart little cow." She smiled slyly and perched herself on the ledge of the window, one bare leg draped over the side. "I was once a girl like you. I danced before ball at the dawn of men. I was found worthy. I became much, much more than a sentient pile of meat. My name was worshipped by emperors and queens. Generals and high priests prostrated themselves before me and offered me sacrifice. I am Trodia, Triodia, Enodia, Brimo, Indalemos, Titonia. I am Hecate." At the utterance of her name, she raised her hand, and my body began cramping in agony. With ease, she moved aside the filing cabinet I had pushed over. The wolf came crawling up the ladder, eyes still a possessed green, no sign of Jake within them. He crept over to Hecate, and she patted his head, pleased at my anguished expression. "Now, we are only waiting for our mutual friend," she said. From below, I heard a splashing in the water. I could see Renee climbing out of the river and over the fence leading to the castle grounds. He was waterlogged, filthy, and nearly frozen, his jacket gone, his shirt torn and bloodied in several places, indicating he had received and healed from several wounds in his struggle. Hecate smiled coldly. She stood, and with an almost imperceptible motion, we were thrown out of the window on the back of a great burst of air, only partially cushioning my body from the fall. I hit the ground violently, and my shoulder exploded into pain. I vomited. Hecate made some sound of disgust at my side. Her feet were bare on the frozen ground, but even the barrenness of winter, earthworms burrowed upwards to writhe against her toes. Renee made a move to approach me, but Hecate raised her hand for him to halt, and a column of fire erupted between us, reaching high into the night sky. He took a deep breath, ragged with rage. "If it's me you want, I cede myself to you once more." Let the girl and the wolf go, and this will be my bargain to you." Hecate sighed.
So predictable. So boring. I know this will come as a shock, Renee. But it's not all about you this time. I reject your little bargain. Go mope around a lumberyard for another few centuries. I could care less.
"Why?" I said, finding the courage to speak. "Why do this?"
Because I stayed my hand when I should have destroyed your wretched forebears. For a century, I watched them fumble their way through a simple set of chores. Did you know your uncle dared to complain to me? He begged me to lift my curse, not for his sake, not even for the sake of his poor servant, but for you.
She dragged me upright by my injured shoulder, digging her nails into my flesh. I tried not giving her the pleasure of hearing me scream, though it felt like my head would burst.
"Precious Nora," she said with contempt. "I hope you enjoyed watching their last moments. I have made a decision, you see. I will snuff you out, each and every one of you. You Colnans are far too troublesome and extremely replaceable. I had planned on killing Martina too. Such a loyal and obstinate thing she was. But then my dear Renee got to her first. Always good for that sort of thing, isn't he?"
She took a fistful of my hair and pulled me closer to her face. Renee took a step forward, fangs bared, but Jake stood between them, snarling threateningly. She whispered into my ear, her words sickening me.
"I planned on killing you too. It would have been simple, quick. But then you had to find him, didn't you?"
She glared at Renee.
"The one who is mine. And then both of you taking away my favorite pet. You upset me, Nora. You upset me greatly. For you, not only death will do."
A torch appeared in her hand, and with it, she traced a flaming circle around us on the ground, which ignited into a sickly green flame. Renee shouted and leapt at Hecate, but he collided with Jake instead, and the two of them fell to the side, locked in a frenzied struggle.
Now, Renee, no cheating,"
she said, snapping her fingers. The silver chain Renee carried with him flew into her hand, and she threw it into the column of flames, where it was consumed with a terrible hiss. She turned her attention to me.
"It is not the next quarter day for quite some time, but I am sure he will not mind. I could not resist the symmetry of it all. You awakened to this reality on the night of the grand tithe, and now you will be the last tax the Colnans ever pay."
Clouds appeared in the night sky, suffocating the stars, churning with ferocity, the green of decay. The air pressed down upon me, pushing the air out of my lungs, causing me to sputter and gasp. Hecate raised her hands, shouting in an ancient tongue. The sky tasted of wet earth and lightning. A frisson of electricity passed through me. A vial of water appeared in Hecate's hands, and she performed her ablutions. Renee pushed Jake aside, but a fissure in the ground opened between us. A terrible roar erupted, the cries of the damned commingling together into a dreadful force. Hecate pressed her palm to my forehead, her eyes glittering with malice, intoning words I could not understand. I reached for the knife at my belt in desperation, but found my sheath to be empty. Looking for this? Hecate said, producing my knife in her left hand. With a cruel laugh, she plunged it into my belly. I heard Renee scream, but he already sounded far away. I looked down in shock. She pulled out the weapon, and blood began to pour out of me. I felt no pain. It was as though I was watching this happen to someone else. The vortex of voices became enhanced around me, and I was being dragged downwards and downwards. I was slipping into the void. The world disappeared. There was nothing, and I was nothing, or at least nothing beyond endless misery. This was a place with no hope. It is impossible to describe such things to those who have not witnessed them. I was in a great maw, of that I could surmise, a great gaping maw of flesh, throbbing, burning, constantly consuming. All around me I could hear weeping, sobbing, cries of madness or anger or futility. There were people here, or what was left of them. Tendrils of flesh fused their bodies to the walls of the thing, which slowly digested them, eating them away only for them to regenerate, continuing the torture in perpetuity. They were still conscious, if that word could be used in this place, unaware of each other, but making the most despicable sounds of suffering, some wailing, others grinding their teeth. Arms of flesh tore at my legs, searing my skin, but just as quickly as they had come, the tendrils receded, and the surface beneath me began to rumble. The wailing was overpowered by a growling coming from the maw itself, as loud as a jet engine and as haunting as the roar of a jaguar. It was enraged. My body was ejected. I was suspended somewhere away, and then I hit the ground. My fingers dug into blessed, real dirt. I blinked and the stars were above me once more. Hecate stood before me, her face twisted in shock. The column of fire was extinguished. Jake fell to the ground, shifting back into human form. Renee rushed to my side. "It appears your payment has been rejected," he said, grinning. Hecate scoffed. She took a step backward, muttering in that same ancient tongue. But nothing happened. I could see panic rising within her. She fell to her knees and raised her hands to the sky, speaking as though she were entreating someone or something. Little sparks danced on her hands. Tiny pieces of skin flecked off of her, slowly at first, then hastening, faster and faster. Hecate let out a great cry, and her body combusted into green flames, stripping her down to her bones, blazing, until she was no more than dust borne away by the swirling winds. A deafening sigh echoed around us, billowing upwards into a swirling funnel cloud. Wisps of tormented souls rose into the spinning air, until with a clap of thunder so loud the castle behind us shook, their whimpers were extinguished, released to their final fate. The clouds receded, and the sky was clear and calm again. I tried to sit up, but my abdomen erupted into pain. I was still bleeding. I was bleeding a lot. I tried to steady myself on Renee's arm, but my fingertips were numb. Renee was speaking to me, but I couldn't understand him. "Get up," I willed myself. "Get up." I could not obey. I was falling. No, I was flying. flying away from my body. I was walking through a tunnel, not a dark tunnel of terrors, but one of soft greenery adorned with flowers in colors beyond comprehension. There was sunlight on the other side. It was warm, so delightfully warm. With every part of me, I wanted to be there. There were people waiting for me, I knew. I tried to step forward, but I was stuck. Something was dragging me back into pain, into dark. I cried, "No, no, please no. Let me rest here, please." There was something in my throat, something thick and sweet. I choked, but I swallowed. I was drinking. I wanted more. It has been several nights since that happened. When I awoke, it was sunset again, as it will be for the rest of my days. Renee is quieter now. I wish I could reassure him that he did the right thing, that I am grateful. He doesn't seem to believe me, but I guess we have a lot of time now to figure it out. "Time enough for you to grow to hate me," he said sadly, pushing a lock of hair away from my face. I hope he's wrong. The cottages are peaceful now. The entities are gone. There is a sense of ease here that is permeating more every day, heralding the coming of spring like no other before. They're gone too, the spirits of Cottage 14. I tried to go thank them. After all, it was their blessing that had saved me from the maw. They had kept their promise to Ellen. "Your soul shall not be dragged down to perdition. You will not know the eternal flames." The cottage door was open. There were buds on the trees. I think they have finally found their true home, their eternal rest. Jake has recovered from his ordeal. He is still a werewolf, but his mind is his own. With our help, he is mostly healed, though there are scars he will carry with him for the rest of his life. We haven't been doing much lately. Things are too raw, too new. We have just begun to breathe again. Sometimes we just sit by the river, a wolf and 2 vampires, a funny trio. "I want to find my parents," Jake said last night. Renee passed me his thermos, which I took a bit too eagerly. "I stopped by my old house today. A neighbor told me they were taken into assisted living a while ago, though he didn't know where. Their minds weren't quite the same since I..." His voice broke. So many lost years, so many ruined lives. "I guess I'm just saying I'm leaving." "Do what you must, Jake," Renee said. "You will go on. You are free now. Find your parents. Find your own kind." Jake nodded. I caught a tear glistening in his eye. "What will you two do?" Jake asked. "Figure out what the hell to tell my mom," I said, chuckling. Even Renee smiled. "But you know, this place, it has some potential." And so, I find myself back where I started, with a giant pile of wallpaper books and a folder of paint swatches. Renee is poring over plans for a complete remodeling of the cottages and motel with some structural enhancements. Given our change in circumstances, our business model and targeted clientele will be slightly different. slightly more nocturnal. But this is where the veil of secrecy must finally descend between us. For now. To everyone who has made it this far in the series, I would like to personally thank you. This has been quite the adventure for me, and this story has been quite a treat to narrate for all of you. If you've made it this far with me, and you still haven't subscribed, I would ask that you please do that now. And to everyone else, thank you for the consistent support. Much love and stay creepy, everyone.